Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
You've heard probably from Jeff Pasternack before. He's our superhero at our Boomer Expos, but he is a super dad. And I have to tell you, I know so much about his son, Jake, when he was little growing up. And Jake used to come to our expos, used to come to our symposiums, and he was always helping. But it was obvious that he was going to be a grand master of life. And under the wonderful tutelage of his mother and father, and I asked him, after I heard what he's been doing with Best Buddies, he's going to tell you all about it, I asked him to come this morning to tell all of you, because it's such a fabulous program. You know why I like this? We turn on the news and we see so many things that we're so unhappy about, whether it's the climate or it's immigration or things that we just think are not right. So when you meet someone like Jake Pasternack, you say, wow, good things are happening in this world. And I want to welcome you to our show, Jake.
Thank you, Anita.
Okay, so now we have you on Facebook Live, and we want you to tell everybody. I know you have a shirt. It's called Best Buddies. You know, we all want a buddy. You know, no matter how old we are, how young we are, we want someone that we can trust that can help us in a time of need. So tell me how this all started. Were you 5 years old?
So my journey, starting with Best Buddies, really happened before I even learned about Best Buddies. Back in first grade, I met a boy named Andrew, and Andrew has become one of my best friends at this point, but he also has Down syndrome. So since first grade, we've been best friends, and I was able to, and we went to every level of schooling together, save for fifth grade, and I was really able to see the adversity that he went through, but also showed me that he could suck the marrow straight out of life and was able to make the most out of harsh circumstances. So that's really where this all kind of started.
And so before that, you really didn't know anyone who had Down syndrome, had you? I mean,
right. I mean, I was young at that point, but Andrew definitely helped define who I am as a person and really changed my perspective on people and really helped bring me to the point in where I am today.
That's really a beautiful story, because, you know, many people that don't have your heart, they shun people like that. I mean, I had been involved with used to call it, people were retarded. They've changed the name now, but they struggled. Their parents had a great struggle. And today there are opportunities and they can go to school, but people like you have moved even further. So that's a good example, but you do things in a much more, and I like the name that you're a global ambassador, because this isn't just something that they do in Palm Beach County, is it?
No, Best Buddies is an international nonprofit organization that helps socially and economically integrate people with intellectual and developmental disabilities into society through a multitude of ways. It can be found in all 50 states and 54 countries worldwide. It was founded by Anthony Kennedy Shriver back in 1989, as that kind of sound familiar because Eunice Shriver founded the Special Olympics. So both of those organizations are extremely tied together.
Oh, I did not know that. I'm so glad that they were the ones that started this, and they did this because of, they had their own personal problem. So, wow, that's a wonderful story. So that it's well funded. How does it get funded?
So Best Buddies is a nonprofit organization, so all of the money that it gets is done through fundraising. I don't specifically know all the details behind that, but since I work as a chapter president at Olympic Heights High School in Boca Raton, we help fundraise money through a multitude of ways. We have last year, for example, we had our second annual Buddy Bash, which is a huge fundraiser at our school. We had over 500 people attending. We raised over $9,000, which helped us be the #1 chapter in the world in fundraising. We raised over $25,000 last year out of the 2,100 chapters worldwide, and that all goes right back to Best Buddies and helping advance inclusion and acceptance within the
My
disabled
goodness,
community.
I was just going to say, pardon the expression, what are you going to do when you grow up? I mean, I know you're grown up, but I mean that's a great beginning for you to appreciate what the world needs. But many people forget that. And we just talked about Down syndrome, but there's so many other things, aren't there? What are some of the other problems that kids, and is this just for kids?
No, Best Buddies doesn't just stop. What's something that I love about Best Buddies is that it doesn't just stop at high school. For a lot of these other nonprofits, and They all do great work. They usually stop when you turn 18. But Best Buddies carries with you throughout life. So they help with job placement. They help with finding specific college programs. They help with teaching. They help with teaching the buddies independent living. They help with something which I participate in called the Ambassador Program. We help teach them public speaking skills so they can advocate for themselves. So Best Buddies does so much more than just getting them through high school and making the friendships, which are amazing. They do so much more work than that. So yeah, and they deal with people with disabilities, not just Down syndrome, that what you can see but what you can't. They deal with the blind, they deal with the deaf, people with physical disabilities, intellectual and developmental, cerebral palsy, all these different types of things. And it's a very open and inclusive environment where they work and they do their best to tailor themselves to fit the needs of everyone that comes into their arms.
So what you have to do probably is also you have to get other kids like you to be doing what you do. I mean, is that easy? How do you do that?
So that's actually an interesting story, and it kind of gets into the story of how I became involved with Best Buddies at my high school. So it was freshman year, and Andrew, my best friend with Down syndrome, goes to my school, and we're all sitting at lunch, and all the freshmen always think, oh, like, we're cool, like, we don't really have to be involved sitting there. So I'm with my friends. I'm like, I'm not really going to do any of this. Like, it's fine. But then Andrew comes up to me, and he brings me a flyer. It's a Best Buddies flyer from Club Rush, which is where all the clubs come at lunch. I'm like, do you want me to do this? And he nods his head. And I'm like, I'll try it out. So at the time when I took over as a sophomore, and most chapter presidents take over as juniors because our chapter president graduated and the chapter was only about 15 members in size, very small. But since that point, which I've learned a lot, our chapter is now over 100 members.
Oh,
we have garnered support from all over the school. We work very closely with our student government, but it once people are aware of what Best Buddies does, I think that it's a movement that a lot of people can get behind, because all it really is at the high school level is just making friendships, and everyone is just looking to make a friend. And it Best Buddies and our chapter really opened up these opportunities to become friends with people that you wouldn't expect. And we hold monthly lunch parties at our school. Tomorrow we're having a bowling event down at Strikes in Boca Raton to help fundraise and to help count as one of our activities for the month. So if people don't know about it, it's hard to kind of get people. But once the ball starts rolling with Best Buddies, I think this happens at a lot of schools. Once the ball starts rolling, you never know where it could go. And people just kind of cling on to this because it's such an important and a movement and something that I think a lot of people can sympathize with.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it changes the whole structure of the way a person thinks. Because right now it's with this, but in the future it'll be with other things where people need help. So do you have to spend much time? Now I know you're very involved, but if someone becomes a buddy, do they have to spend a lot of time doing that with a person that they're helping?
So in Best Buddies, there are two classifications of people. They're buddies and they're peer buddies. So the buddies are the people who are intellectually or developmentally disabled, while the peer buddies are people like you and me. So at our high school, for the high school level, when you're in a one-to-one friendship, there's something called the 4-2 requirement, which is what Best Buddies International says is the minimum for what should be a friendship. So it's 4 interactions of 30 minutes or less. So it could be texting, sitting with each other at lunch, things like that. And then you have to have 2 interactions of 30 minutes or more. So we satisfy this at our school by having mandatory, which are all fun events. We have a 1-hour lunch parties where we have music, games, food, activities, things like that. And then we do an event outside of school. So for again, we're doing the bowling event. We'll be doing events at parks and everything, and to help build these friendships. But while the 4-2 requirement is a thing, all that's really required of a peer buddy is just to be a friend. And that's so simplistic in actuality, just to be able to reach out to someone and just talk with them just like you would with anyone else. Because I think what Best Buddies does so well, and I think that as you're referencing can apply to a lot of different facets of life, is everyone I think is born with like predispositions for these people, and it's not their fault. I don't think people are as back in the past when there was a lot of discrimination against people with disabilities. I don't think that exists anymore. I just think that because people are not exposed to people with an IDD, they aren't sure how to handle themselves. So while it's tolerated, it's not so much accepted. So I think Best Buddies crosses that line of toleration, and it brings them to being accepted and being recognized as functioning members of society. And I think that at every level that this organization works at, I think that's something that it does very well.
You know, I just want to tell everybody you're listening to Jake. Jake Pasternack is probably 50 years old, but he's really not. That he acts like it. But how old are you, Jake?
I'm 17. I'm turning 18 in just about a week or so.
Oh, my goodness. But you see, a lot of the influence, your goodness, comes from your family. And unfortunately, a lot of people haven't had the kind of family that you've had. They haven't, maybe some don't even have families. And so I think what you're doing in my brain now, and tell me if I'm wrong, people who haven't had the kind of background that you've had, by getting involved in Best Buddies, maybe it uplifts them in an area that they never had that kind of training.
Right. I mean, I think that regardless of where you come from, that this is a movement, that this is an idea, that this idea of acceptance and inclusion is transcendent across different movements. So I think that Best Buddies definitely becomes a second family for a lot of, not just us, for the buddies. And just a great way to show this is every year Best Buddies holds what they call Leadership Conference. And it's at Indiana University at Bloomington. There's over 3,000 people that attend from all over the world. And you really get to, you work within your county. You get to meet all the people and make friends from all over the county, which is great, and just collaboration. But you also get to meet people from all over the world. There's a dance on the final night, and 2 years ago, I happened to be dancing with a girl and her buddy from Malaysia, which is like, how do you expect something like that? And you always hear all of these buddies, like one of my best friends, Jamie, he's another global ambassador. All he talks about is that Best Buddies is my second family, and I'll pick him up. We'll go out to eat. He's not my buddy, but we're still friends outside of it. And Best Buddies definitely becomes a second family. So for both people with and without disabilities. So I think that is something that holds true in this situation.
Yeah, that's great. We do have, I don't know if you know this person, Bonnie Dunauer, Dunauer, is watching. Anyway. Okay. I want to continue with this because this is so fascinating. So you're telling me that you're here locally doing this, but this is worldwide. And are you traveling? Where else are you traveling doing this?
So I just started this is my first of 2 years as a global ambassador. And so far I have stayed pretty local for what it's worth. The other global ambassadors are all people with an intellectual developmental disability. So I found myself in a unique situation because my story with Andrew was so convincing to the brass of Best Buddies and Andrew, we have buddies that have Down syndrome that are global ambassadors, but Andrew also has apraxia, which is completely separate and is a condition which disturbs the interaction between the brain and the mouth. So instead of him going to speak because it's hard for him and he can be shy, sometimes we'll go together. So I'm the global ambassador. So far we've stayed pretty local. Last year I did speak at the Staff Leadership Conference that had around 300 people at it. Last year I also spoke at the Palm Beach County Champion of the Year Gala, which is a fundraising event for Best Buddies that had a couple hundred people at that. I go around to different schools in the county and I help them with starting up chapters or like building hype and building energy. So while my public speaking wise, I've really just kind of started, but I'm definitely looking forward to doing more things like this and really just getting out there.
I'm glad I'm one of your first ones. This is fantastic. So then, at listening to you, I was curious if you could wave a magic wand. What would you want it to be for Best Buddies? What would your greatest wish? You can, whatever you're thinking.
I mean, I don't know if there's a greatest wish. Probably to put it best, as Anthony Shriver said, he said, who's the founder of Best Buddies, he said, we want to get to the point in time where we can put ourselves out of business, where Best Buddies isn't needed anymore because the buddies can advocate for themselves. They can find equal jobs in the workplace. They can get into college without a problem. They can make friends without the prejudices that come against them. So I think if there's a wish, it's that we get to the point where Best Buddies is no longer needed, and the work that Best Buddies would have done up until that point is completed, and they are accepted to the best that we can in our society.
Yeah, this is all, and I can say this because was involved for about 7 years with this organization, ARC in Palm Beach County. It's okay to talk about, we're going to get to this, but you take someone who has Down syndrome, and whether it's their movement or the, other things, it's very hard. This is not casual. I want people to understand this, that when you take something on like this, and you have this, Andrew is your very good friend, you understand more than most people. Unless someone's with someone all the time, they're in different degrees. It's severe Down syndrome, all the way up to, a high functioning. But you get someone very severely diagnosed or has this, it's very hard for them to be in a regular school. There's a lot of discussion on this, and I'd like your opinion and see if you, you're being very light and very wonderful about this, but some of these diseases or these syndromes are very serious, and it's hard to take those people and move them into a general society. Now, when I was a part of this, the greatest thing we had were the wonderful community homes that you could put 4 of them in with a house mother, and they functioned. But there were always problems. One thing I remember, there was a young man who fell in love with another young woman who also had Down syndrome, and the families were very upset about that because they weren't able to function the way that another couple would have. So, these are serious problems. How do you, as a young person, deal with this? Do you have advisors? That's, I guess, what I'm asking, that help you. People who are psychologists and social workers who work with you, being a buddy?
Not me specifically. Again, at the high school level, all it really is just about making friendships. There are as you move up the ladder, there are all these different people that work within Best Buddies that serve all different types of functions to help this community. But since at the high school level and at elementary, middle, and mostly college, it's really just about making the friendships. It's because there was a study done a few years ago. I can't remember where it was from, but it's one that Best Buddies highlights a lot, and it showed the top 4 most important people in the life of a normal person and in the life of someone with an intellectual developmental disability. And what they found was that the person without the disability had, their parents, siblings, and then they had like 1 or 2 friends that were extremely important to them. But for the person with a disability, they only had 3 people on the list. They had their parents and then their caregiver, and they were missing that friend. So, and that friend is really important. It's someone that you can just talk about anything with. You can talk about sports or pop culture or share serious concerns that you're having to someone that's going to be listening. So I think that for a problem that a buddy could be having, just knowing that there's someone to lean on during a difficult time, I think that's something that Best Buddies does a lot with. And to your point about the assisted living homes, the colleges program works within the community. So unlike at a high school where we just work within the kids at our high school, the college Best Buddies chapters work within their community. They work with different homes, and they pair college kids with adult buddies. And they they do all of the same types of events and the things to keep them to build that friendship and to keep them involved in the community.
That's very good. That was very clearly said, because I realize now what you're saying. Being a buddy is not being a caretaker.
No, it's not being a caretaker. It's being a friend. That's all it is.
That clarified that for me. So it's being a friend, and everybody needs a friend. But what I think you're getting at is a lot of people who had disabilities weren't able to have friends because people were afraid of them or didn't understand them. And that's what you've clarified, isn't it?
Right.
I think that's wonderful. Now, no matter what their situation is, they have someone who cares about them, and they know it, and they can just, whatever they do, it's going to be okay, right?
Right. That's exactly what it is. It's giving them that that self-confidence that they're able to go out there and make friends. And again, I can just refer back to Andrew for this, for a personal story. Back in elementary school and middle school, he was extremely unconfident in his ability to communicate because of his apraxia, and I was really one of his only friends at the time. But since Best Buddies has started, you can see him walking through the halls, waving at everyone, doing handshakes with everyone. Everyone knows Andrew, everyone knows. All of our buddies have become extremely mainstreamed into our school in just terms of the awareness that people are friends with them and everything. And that this isn't just the case at our school. It's wherever Best Buddies is, there's definitely an impact that can be felt within just the social fabric of that school. So that's something that I think is very good. And again, being a buddy is all about just being a friend, just being there, regardless of the situation, whether it's, again, talking about sports or helping them with school or through a tough time or whatever it could be. It's becoming friends with a buddy. It's becoming friends with the family. It's everything that you would do normally as a friend, except you're doing it with a person with a disability, which should not be and isn't a significant change.
So I'll ask you a strange question. Are there more women than men or boys and girls involved, or is it 50-50?
So I'd have to say, just from the eye test from Leadership Conference, there are a lot more women chapter presidents, a lot more high school and college girls who are chapter presidents. But something that I do pride myself on is being the source of testosterone for a chapter. I
love that. Well
and definitely,
said.
I think getting the guys involved is important too, because the girls always have the heart and the care for it. But I think but the guys do absolutely as well. I mean, our football team is all of our coaches at our school work with our IDD students, so all of the sports teams are really great. Especially our softball team is wonderful with them. Our student government is wonderful with them. So, yeah.
So then let me ask you this. So someone that, if they're highly functioning and they have Down syndrome, are they in classes, general classes, or are they segregated? How is it working?
So at our high school, we have two different levels of how this goes. So we have, at our high school, I think it's one of the only ones in the county, we just have a specific unit for kids who are extremely, who are high on the autistic spectrum, that are extremely low functioning, and they each have their own personal shadow, and they're completely separate from the rest of the student body, not because we want them to be separate, but because they just wouldn't be able to handle that large atmosphere. And we have been trying to get involved with the autistic unit at our high school. And instead of them coming to one of our events, we'd go to them. And that's something that we've been pushing for over the past few months, and something that we're trying to get some track work on. But for the higher functioning buddies, they have some of their classes are mainstreamed, and some of their classes are with just specifically for them. But what's also really cool about our high school is that there's this great program that our high school does, and for seniors and in Florida, I believe you're someone with a disability is allowed to stay in high school until 21. What they do is they get a job at the mall, and that's one of their class periods. So they go for about an hour to 2 hours a day, and they go to the mall and they work at Auntie Anne's or the Gap, or these stores that gives them that personal experience, and it also helps them, get acclimated into how working is, how dealing with people is. So are they separate in some ways? Yes, some for necessity and just to accommodate the learning difficulties that they may have. But a lot of the times they're also just in regular classes. For whether it's for history or for math, sometimes they're in a regular class and they are mainstreamed. I think that's something that's very important, because at the same time, while it's important to make sure that they're being properly educated and that there's a pace set up for them, I think having a mix is important, because it allows kids in the school to see them, to be involved with them, and just to be exposed to them. So when they go off into the world and they encounter someone, whether it's in the workplace or like at a restaurant or whatever it may be, it's not a culture shock seeing that. So I think that a good, while you can't have, well, unfortunately for most of the buddies, we can't have all mainstream classes. While some are the extremely high functioning ones, I think a good mix is important because it allows them to be educated at the pace in which they need to be, but also allows the community to be exposed to them, which I think is important too, just to know that these people do exist and that they are can be functioning members of society.
Louis Tesler is watching you, and Louis actually is a cousin of mine, and he lives afar. I think he either lives in California or something. He's a pilot. It's very interesting. So we have a couple of people. There are other people that they just didn't get on, but I know they're watching. I love your explanation. Well, they're very lucky to have you, and I would think, that your father is extremely happy with what you have created, and I like this because I don't have time to tell you, but I volunteered for a year with a woman in an iron lung, and you probably don't even know what an iron lung.
I did that. Yeah.
She had polio from the time she was 9, and she was 30 when I met her. But she could paint with a stick in her mouth. She could type with a stick in her mouth, and it's a big long story. But for me, that's whenever I think about things, I think about Darlene, because it changed my life having someone like that, and so. I understand so much of this, and people loved her. They came in, and here she is in this iron lung, surviving. So what you're doing is wonderful, and I wish more people would think about what you do. And I know that you're out there. I'm so glad they found you. Global ambassador will probably be running another 10 years. You'll be running the organization, but it was just wonderful having you come on our show this morning, Jake. Jake Pasternack and. Global Ambassador for Best Buddies, and I look forward to seeing you do a lot more things with this.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Anita.
Yeah, you're great. I mean, and you, I'm sure that there'll be a lot more people who now, after listening to this, will be more caring. Just make a friend with somebody if you think they need them, and even people who don't seem like they, outwardly, they probably need you anyway, right?
That's right.
So thanks so much, Jake.
Thank you.